Word of Mouth is an adult story time presented by the Juliette Hampton Morgan Memorial Library. My name is Amy Campbell, and today I'll be reading Today a Woman Went Mad in the Supermarket and Women of Influence. Starting in June, it will be posted online only. As a reminder, some stories contain adult language and content. It is recommended you review stories before allowing younger audiences to listen. This is Today a Woman Went Mad in the Supermarket by Hilma Wolitzer. Even now, saying it aloud or repeating that sentence to my husband later, I will see that it is meant to amuse, to attract interest, to get attention. Of course, I'm too sophisticated in things psychological, isn't everyone today, to think that one goes mad at a moment's notice. There are insipid beginnings to a nervous breakdown. There's lonely crying in the bathroom, balanced on the edge of the tub, and in the kitchen, weeping into the dishwater, tears breaking the surface of the suds. There's forgetting or wishing to forget the names of the children, the way to the local bank, the reason for getting up in the morning. There's loss of vanity, toenails growing long and dirty into prehensile claws, hair uncombed, eyebrows unplucked. Yet something seems very right to me about going mad in a supermarket. Those painted oranges threatening to burst at the navel, formations of cans armored with labels and prices and weights, cuts of meat aggressively bloody, and crafty peaches and apples showing only their glowing, perfect faces, hiding the rot and soft spots on their undersides. Nevertheless, this woman did not go trundling her cart through the ordered chaos. She stood transfixed, as if caught in some great thought. She was blocking the aisle. Excuse me, I said tentatively, hesitant and self-protective as only a woman expecting her first child can be. Pardon me, could I just get through? She turned slowly, and the two small children clinging to her skirt held on and tightened the cloth across her hips. Perhaps for the glory of the retelling, I might say that she was a great beauty, that her beauty was marred or enhanced only by her wild expression. In truth, she was pretty in a common sort of way, with conventional hair and eyes and nose. Only what she said then stopped me from clearing my throat and asking again if she would move and let me through. She gripped the handle of her empty cart and said, "There is no end to it." It was spoken so simply and undramatically, but with such honest conviction that for a moment I thought she was referring to the aisle of the supermarket. Perhaps it was blocked ahead of us and she couldn't move up further. But then she said, "I have tried, and I have tried, and there is no end to it. Ask Harold, ask anybody, ask my mother." Do you feel all right?" I asked. "Can I help you?" Her knuckles were white and hard as she clung to the cart. She did not answer. I looked around me self-consciously, and then I leaned toward her and said, "Would you like to go home?" "You know," she said severely, "that I can't go there." Then a woman rattled her cart toward us from the other end of the aisle. "Excuse me," she called out cheerfully, "coming through." "Could you go the other way?" I asked her. "Why should I go the other way?" she demanded. "Because this aisle is blocked," I answered, grimacing and rolling my eyes. She looked at me suspiciously and turned her cart briskly back in the other direction. A chain of voices began in the back of the store. I heard the last one call, "Mr. A! Mr. A!" Then for a few minutes we were alone, the woman and her children and me. We stood in the supermarket as if primed for a television commercial in which the magical product would come winging from the shelves, where brand X would forever stay, unwanted and untried. The manager, Mr. A, came eagerly toward us. He is a kindly fellow who perhaps could seem even kinder in a small, intimate grocery store. He will sprint off on a given signal and bring back the breadcrumbs or the baking soda or the canned crab meat that you can't seem to find anywhere. He rubbed his hands nervously. "How can I bear it?" the woman cried in grief. Mr. A looked at her questioningly. "Can I get you some water?" he asked. She didn't answer him, but covered her mouth with her hand so that all of her anguish was concentrated in her eyes. I began to tremble. and I worried that my concern for her would somehow affect the child I was carrying. Didn't I worry 2 aisles back if, when the time came, I would choose the right baby food, that my milk would flow, that I would be a wise and tranquil mother? All this time, the 2 small children did not release their grip on their mother's skirt. "She's very ill," I told Mr. A. "Should I call the police?" he asked. The woman began to weep big, flowing tears, and I thought then that all the priests and plumbers and the policemen of the world could not stay them. No, I said quickly, looking at the children. Bending at the knees, I leaned toward the taller child. "What's your name?" I asked him. I was close enough to smell his milky breath and to see that his nose was running onto a crusty sore right under it. He turned his face away from mine and didn't answer. Feeling bolder, I took the handbag that was looped over the woman's wrist, and she didn't resist me. She seemed not to notice. "There must be something, if only I could remember," she said vaguely. The pocketbook creaked open, as if from long disuse, or like the mouth of a nervous child at the dentist's. Mr. A peered over my shoulder. There was a sweet hair tonic smell. The pocketbook was empty. We peered into it, unbelieving. It was the saddest thing I had ever seen, that empty pocketbook. "Geez," Mr. A whispered. But then he brightened. "Say," he said, "say, if her pocketbook's empty, then she doesn't have any car keys. She must have walked here. If she walked here, then she can't live too far." I looked at him coldly. "Maybe she left them in the car," I said, "or maybe she cleaned out her purse somewhere." This deflated him for only a moment. He looked thoughtful, then called to a stock boy who had been staring at us. Mr. A sent him out to the parking lot and told him to go look at the ignitions of all the cars. "Pee-pee," said the smaller child suddenly, tugging at his mother's skirt. "Oh," I said, "he has to go to the bathroom." I took his fist and tried to detach it from his mother's skirt. He held fast with the tenacity of a tick in a dog's coat. "Mama, pee-pee," the child insisted. "He only wants his mother to take him," I told Mr. A, and he nodded as if I were translating from a foreign language. The child stuck his thumb into his mouth and sucked greedily. When the stock boy came back, he said that there weren't any cars with keys in them. A small group of women had gathered at the end of the aisle, curiosity drawing them close, fear keeping them distant. "Do any of you know this woman?" I called to them. They mumbled among themselves, and then a tall, raw-boned woman in a Girl Scout leader uniform walked closer. "I don't know her," she began, and from the rear someone called, "Why don't you look at her pocketbook?" "I don't know her," the tall woman repeated, "but I know who she is." She ducked her head and then glanced up guiltily. "Her name is Shirley Lewis, Mrs. Harold Lewis," she whispered, and then fell back into the crowd of women like a frightened informer. "But where does she live?" I asked irritably. Oh, pee-pee," sighed the little boy, and a stream of urine tentatively began to run down his leg. "Never rush into anything," his mother stated, and then nostalgically, "How nice it was to be the children." Where, I snapped at the tall woman. I knew that I was vying with Mr. A. We were playing detective, savior, 20 questions, God. Who would win this terrible contest and solve the mystery and set things right again? I had a good lead, all-powerful, matriarchal, replete with swollen belly. The woman came forward again. She mumbled an address and stepped back into the group of women. Mr. A scribbled the information in a little notebook and went to the telephone in his office. 1 point for Mr. A. "Where is Harold?" I asked slyly when Mr. A had gone. Shirley Lewis looked at me with real interest. "Ha ha ha," she said and smirked as if I had said something vulgar but worth noting. The little boy stood straddling his puddle, miserable with his public act. I looked into my shopping cart and saw that the frozen things had begun to sweat and thaw. I was very tired. My legs were singing with fatigue. I wanted to sit down. I wanted to go home and take a bath. The woman was tiresome. The game was tedious. The supermarket was boring. We sat at the table, Shirley Lewis began. My grandmother brought in the soup. It was so heavy, her hands trembled. Uncle Al brought everybody in the car. He had a Pontiac. Mr. A came back. He was smiling. The game was over. Her husband is home. He was sleeping. He didn't even know she was out. Ah, moaned the crowd of women like a Greek chorus. Soon the husband came. He had the car, after all. The children rushed from their mother to him. Fair weather friends, I thought. He was tall and burly. He was wearing workman's clothes, and his shoes were untied. There were sleep creases down the side of one cheek. He ignored everyone else, although we looked eagerly to him as we might to the comedy relief in a melodrama. Incredibly, he scolded the small boy for wetting his pants. To his wife, he said, "What's the matter with you?" And he grabbed her arm. She went with him, and then it was all over. Several women broke away from the crowd and went to the window. They watched Harold and Shirley and the children get into the car. I looked dully into my shopping cart. It was impossible to remember the other things I had wanted to buy. Shirley Lewis's pocketbook lay gaping on top of my own. I wondered if it would ever be returned to her. I thought that we would not be hearing from her or her husband. Harold hadn't said thank you to anyone. I imagined giddily an engraved card coming in the mail. "Mr. Harold Lewis and family thank you for the kindness extended to Mrs. Lewis in her time of need." Mr. A was extremely gracious. He guided me to an unopened checkout counter and personally rang up the few items in my cart. "Some fun," he said, clucking his tongue. "You are swell." He was the master detective, congratulating the cop on the beat. His munificence knew no bounds. He offered to take my package to the car. "No," I said, yawning in his face. I left the pocketbook on his counter, sneakily, as one leaves a litter of kittens in a vacant lot. "Goodbye," some of the women called to me. I had proved myself after all, and someday they would ask me to join committees and protest groups and the PTA. I went home. My matriarchal stature had changed to a pregnant waddle. When my husband came home from work, I was sitting in the bathtub and weeping. What is it?" he cried, primed for catastrophe. "Everything," I said, gesturing at the swelling that rose above the water level. "Everything. The human condition, the world." His face relaxed slightly, and he waited for me to go on. I rose, the water spiraling from my belly. "A woman went mad in the supermarket today." He managed to look both compassionate and questioning. "What did you do?" I waved the towel as if it were a banner, a piece of evidence. There was nothing I could do. Nothing at all. I mean, I tried, but there was simply no way that I could help her. He took the towel and began to dry my back. "I think I know how you feel," he said. "But you can't mother the whole world." "No," I said. "I guess I can't, can I?" I turned around and threw myself awkwardly into his arms. This is Women of Influence by Bonnie Burnard. We had a fairly good night. My mother's dying is still following its own steady pace, but there was pleasure in being together, pleasure even in silence. Last week, when she acknowledged the approach of her death simply by saying that she didn't particularly want to be alone, my brothers and I arranged to stay with her in the hospital room day and night. We take shifts and we cooperate with the staff by keeping out of the way and by accepting or pretending to accept their professional judgment. It's good that we are all here now, gathered from our separate parts of the country. The four of us are stronger than any hospital administration. We won't leave her. She's getting notes and letters with her greeting cards. Her friends and relatives offer specific, cherished memories. Odd things. Last night, my aunt's letter, written in my uncle's hand, brought full-color scenes to her mind. I could see it in her face as she listened to me reading it. Some of the scenes included me as a child. Many of them gave offhanded praise for my mother's character, which is her due. As I drive across the city to my aunt's hospital, the red sun is just rising. I notice kitchen lights coming on. There have been no other cars, only a snowplow gathering the filthy February buildup. My mother's ward is not one of the new ones, wherein family responsibility is acknowledged. Many of the other patients who are also dying see no one but uniformed staff from one Sunday to the next. Sunday's a big day, containing as only Sunday could a compression of anger and guilt and grief and compassion. As if the visitors cannot deny the day its rights. Through the week, there are no flower deliveries. Night tables hold Bibles and Testaments and discarded reading glasses and pictures of children, some dated, some very recent. The day nurses do not come bustling down the hall with news of the world. The world doesn't exist. Each day is 24 hours of bits of sleep and bits of talk and bits of pain. The cries and moans come at any time, though they are harder to ignore in the night. There is no place to look in the night for distraction, no bright rooftops in the window. Albert down the hall is the best we can hope for at night. Of all his loud contributions, we favor the Scotch enema story. Before he was admitted, his wife had had to go to an all-night drugstore for an enema kit, her last valiant effort. It cost her $19. He said if he'd known, he would have sent her out for Scotch. This in a bellowing voice to the young night nurse and down the hall to us. Maybe my mother's last good laugh. She's made me repeat it twice. There is no spiritual unease in my mother's room, and I am immensely grateful. She has always had at her disposal the God she first decided she believed in. I can lift her and turn her, can feed her as patiently as I have fed my babies. I can reach my arms through the steel bars of her bed to rub her small aching legs. I can jump with her to any time she remembers, lying when I have to, but I can do no more. I could not possibly pray. There's a staff room down the hall from my mother's, and the nurses encourage me to have a cup of tea while they are with her, changing the catheter or checking the intravenous or shooting the painkiller into her bruised hip. It's easy to tell when the pain is edging back now. I can get her a shot of codeine and have it working before the grimace comes to her face. One of the nurses told us that we are alike, my mother and I, in the face. I squared my shoulders and stuck my nose into the air. My mother lit up a little, not at my acceptance of the flattery, as the nurse might have thought. We are not good-looking women. She brightened at my urge to be an ass, even at her deathbed. It was a little joke. The morning is coming brighter now. There are cars at intersections, waiting alone against red lights. I can see the silhouette of the other hospital ahead, looming confidently over the wartime houses which surround it. The sun looks strangely red for winter. There is an old picture with my aunt's letter. They stand together. My mother, 12 or 13, in a modest dark dress, holds the hand of a brilliantly beautiful younger sister. I have seen the picture before and have always imagined that my mother had set my aunt's golden ringlets patiently in preparation for the day of visiting and picture taking. Her own hair is short and dark, a bob, I think. Her face speaks to the camera with the recent acceptance of her fate as a woman. I know I am plain, it says, but I'm good just the same. In her letter, my aunt speaks of their young sisterhood on the farm, of harvesting crews and eager young men, as if the men were eager for both of them. In the final paragraph, she comes close to what she wants to say. You always took such care with my clothes and hair. You taught me to be proud of myself. I wonder if she's pretty in her hospital bed. She is 6 years younger than my mother. The fact of their ages is mentioned a lot now, but her prognosis is the same. She had an early influence on me, the result of my frequent summer stays with her on the farm. My parents took motor trips in the summer to the coast or to Lake Louise, and my aunt always asked if she could have me. I went eagerly because I thought I should. She would have been younger than I am now. She was tall and forceful, square-shouldered, competent even in bone structure. She taught school. Troublesome kids were saved by a year of her care. The men loved her. She was funny and often quoted and always quoting others, sharing absurdities and telling stories which made other people look good and worth knowing. If things got too settled at a family gathering, she would start something or encourage someone else to. "Ray," she'd say, "tell the kids about Stu Galt and that mare." If she was met with reticence, she would start the story herself with just a few words, tempting the one whose story it was until he could no longer resist and we'd have it. She was the singer of first bars, reminding the singers, setting them off. She wore bright wool dresses with just the right amount of jewelry and sometimes slacks, creased like a man's, like Lauren Bacall's. She wore makeup daily, flaunting dark eyes and bright lips. She talked to me when I stayed with her and smiled a lot. She had ideas for my hair, would comb through the curly mess over and over and try with pins and ribbons to expose what she said could be a pretty little face. She nagged me to shed the 10 extra pounds I carried, fixed me lots of fruit. But I ran whenever I could to my uncle in the fields, carrying cold water and matrimonial squares wrapped carefully in waxed paper. And I cruised the ditches with the labs, their muscled black bodies eager to help me find whatever it was I hunted. I remember her disappointed face at the table when I asked my uncle for potatoes and he scooped whatever was left evenly between his plate and mine. She didn't yet have her own daughter. My mother has been a quieter kind of woman, short and solid, raising her kids in town, away from the dirt and strain of the farm. She did not finish high school. She stayed on the farm to help with the younger half of the family until she married the serious young man one stile away. I do not remember her ever telling a story. She has always been audience, pure audience. The storytellers, her brothers and friends, measured their skill on her face, working toward the slow, sure smile. A very few times, when things were really rolling, a laugh would burst aloud from her and she'd say, "Ha! Oh, I'd forgotten. Oh, I'd forgotten." When she was made to smile, it seemed she had been given something that would stay with her. She refinished furniture, chairs and trunks and beds. Men from Toronto sniffed her out, offered what she called big prices for their pieces she had stashed all over the basement, but she just laughed and gave them coffee and pie, then a motherly pat as she put them out the door. She designed quilts and worked on them in the winter evenings as she watched her hockey games, cheered her Frenchmen down the ice. I have a dozen of her quilts, and they are beautiful. My daughters have their own, which I am not to use. She served the people she loved what they craved. Hickory nuts in the tarts for John, a good whitefish dinner for Gordon, garden corn for Emily's kids. In her fully modern town kitchen, she had bins built for sugar and flour. In a family crisis, and I mean the big family here, not just us, she would gather people to talk, to see if something couldn't be done. She didn't sit at the table with them. She stood at the counter buttering raisin bread or slicing cake, and she didn't offer suggestions as my aunt did, but it was her table. When my first university calendar arrived, she said, "None of it will do you any harm." The only suggestion I remember other than the long ago wash your hair kind of suggestion was when my own first child was born. In a small, correct script on blue scented paper, "Your place is at home with your baby. Don't rush away." This when feminism was already old news. I have followed her advice. My degree is an obscure memory, and my kids are solid, though not exceptional in any way. She would think me foolish if I expected them to be. I blamed her for a time, wished she had come down hard on me, made me into something extreme and wonderful as my aunt would have. A girl whose mother thinks hair should be nothing more than clean is at a tremendous disadvantage. The lot here is half empty. Parking will not be a problem. I'll sit for a minute and finish my cigarette. There will be oxygen in this room too. When my brother came into the room this morning, my mother was still holding my aunt's letter, staring carefully at her own thoughts. She didn't acknowledge him. He had taken his boots off at the door and padded around to the other side of the bed, pulling a chair up close to ask what she wanted for breakfast. He always takes the early morning shift and has developed a system to get her what she thinks she might try to eat. The trolley in the hall holds the trays, and he lifts each lid silently, switching things as necessary to make her a perfect breakfast. She rarely eats more than half a bite, and that only to please him. But it's the way their time begins. He is telling her that he would commit grand larceny on her behalf as he sneaks around the gray hospital hallway in his socks. My mother gave him a just a minute face and spoke to me. I've wasted a lot of time believing that her beautiful face made mine uglier. Now I'm thinking what a pleasure it was to have her all those years. I should have taken her just the way I took a sunset or a lace tablecloth. My brother busied himself by rolling up his sleeves, wanting no explanation. My mother cleared her throat. Freshen yourself a little, she said. You look tired. I walked to the spotless old bathroom and saw in the mirror a tired, old, middle-aged face that did indeed need freshening. I scrubbed my face hard. My brother came in with my purse. Mom says your makeup is likely in here, he said, shrugging his shoulders. There was makeup in it, all right, enough to transform me. Blue and red and pink and brown, each in its respective little case, each with its respective little job. I didn't stop at daytime subtlety. I applied and reapplied. I brushed my hair 100 strokes, watching it snap back as always to disorder. When I presented myself at my mother's bedside, she grinned. Her teeth were dark and her mouth sore from the dryness. From the day you were born, she said, I've loved your hair best. She hesitated, then, I'll see you tonight. I kissed her forehead, leaving a bright red lip print. My brother sat, stirring her orange juice with a straw. The corridors in this hospital are wider, brighter. The rugs continue beyond the first floor. I see my uncle sitting alone at the end of a long hall in front of a window. I approach him, careful not to look into the rooms I am passing. A nurse stops to ask if she can help, and I say no. My uncle hasn't heard me, so I sit down close to him, wishing I could offer cold water and matrimonial squares. Wishing he was young and brown. He looks up with bleary eyes and smiles. How was your mother this morning? He asks. I think this is too much for one man. Dan's with her, I tell him. She's talking a bit. He shakes his head. It is too much. He clears his throat. Joanne is coming from Ottawa. She left last night, driving. Joanne is the daughter who was proper raw material. Even when half-grown, she was sociable and elegant, capable. She studied dance at the conservatory in Toronto, was driven hundreds of miles for her lessons. My mother has a picture of her at home. She sits in front of a fire at a cottage in a blue Angora sweater, her hand caught in the act of lifting her pale blonde hair away from her face. She studied in France, where she met and married a French-Canadian composer. I suspect she has magnificent children. I can see that my uncle has been following her in his mind all night, knows within a half hour what her safe arrival time should be. Your aunt has had a bit to eat, he says. If she's sleeping, you just nudge her a little. She'll want to see you. I stand up and move into the room. My aunt lies flat out, stiff. Her eyes are closed. Her pain has been more sudden and mysterious than my mother's. It's a different kind of thing. She is controlling herself with the force of her will, and I hesitate to touch her. She has not wasted away to 70 pounds as my mother has. She still looks beautiful and almost healthy. A cold compress rests on her forehead. One of her hands is flat on her stomach, and the other clutches the sheet. I reach for the hand that isn't clutching. She opens her eyes, perhaps expecting her daughter. When she sees it's me, she says my name and closes her hand over mine, sliding them together up to her chest. "How is your mother?" she asks. "She's comfortable," I answer angry. "Can't they give you something?" She ignores my question. "Is she afraid?" "I don't think so," I tell her. "Good," she says, moving her head with a slow effort toward me. "Did you read her my letter? I said at the top that someone was to read it to her." "Yes, I did," I tell her, "twice." She remembers it all. "Your mother was wonderful to me," she says. "I've been such a vain brat all my life, and all that time, I didn't know she was playing. I really didn't. When you look at her, you don't see a face. You see someone who loves you, no matter what." Her grip becomes a little tighter, is, I think, as tight as she can make it. She leaves me to go back to fighting the pain. I realize I have not been asked to bring my mother's forgiveness here. Or have I? Is my mother counting on me to pass it on? Or to live with it? I don't want her compromised. I don't want her apologizing for an attitude she was entitled to. But she has recanted. To herself, to the air in her hospital room, to me. I have to say the words here, in this room, whether or not I want to. She said you gave pleasure the way a sunset does, or a lace tablecloth. For an instant, the tension on my aunt's face relaxes, and I want her to sit up and hold me. I think how proud I will be if this face reappears to me in a grandchild. I must carry the gene somewhere. I hope I have passed it on unharmed. I hear someone come into the room. Joanne moves around the bed to the other side, and she is lovely. I slip my hand out from under my aunt's to make room for hers. My aunt opens her eyes at the movement of hands and sees us both. "Tell your mother that I think we've done a bang-up job, both of us. Tell her I'll see her in lineup for rewards." This is not the mockery it would have been another time. I kiss her lightly on the cheek. My lips leave a faint red print, so I take a tissue from the box at her night table. Sure she will not want to be left smudged. "Don't touch that," she says. In a matter of days, these two women will be gone. I can already see the world without them. Beyond my cousin's head, the red sun is fully risen now, a gaudy, disrespectful whore of a sun, shining down on children in their beds, warming them. I can feel in the palms of my hands what passed from sister to sister when they posed for the picture on that shared summer day. It is not unlike the grace I have carried from one to the other this dismal winter morning. And still, there is no comfort. There is only the sun and the steady, wet snow. Good women, full of grace, stay with me.